interview with Martin Pollock took place at Martin's house in Stanley on October 5th, 1984. The interviewer was Mike Green.
Well, ice was an important commodity in the early days as it is today. In those days they didn't have refrigerators, and so they had to improvise the best they could. For many, many years, the people of cold communities would have an ice harvest. They would select usually a pond someplace, cut their ice for the summer months from the pond, and stored in ice houses. Ice houses were usually just buildings, the shell of a building, and they would put the ice in the ice house and put a thick barrier of sawdust around all sides of the ice, and the sawdust acted as a good insulator and would keep the ice frozen for usually the entire summer months. And when the people needed ice for cooling and ice cream making and so forth, where they would dig down into the sawdust and pull out a block of ice and cover up the rest of it. And they would use it for ice box. They would use the ice in ice boxes and for other purposes. Well, up in this valley, Little Redfish Lake was just ideal for harvesting ice because it was easily accessible for sleigh travel for all the inhabitants of Sawtooth Valley and Stanley. But it wasn't just a simple matter of going out and cutting the ice. There was they had to do a certain amount of work in order to get the proper ice that they wanted to cut. Now, Little Redfish Lake usually starts to freeze over in end of November and early part of December. And perhaps the ice will get maybe 3 or 4 inches thick, and then invariably a snowstorm will come along and put 3 or 4 inches of snow on top of the ice. Because snow is an excellent insulator, while then the ice doesn't get very much thicker. So in order to get 18 inches of ice, the snow had to be removed, and they would get the local people who were interested in harvesting ice to go out and clear the snow off of a relatively large patch of Little Redfish Lake. And every time it snowed, they'd have to go out and repeat the snow removal until the ice froze to a depth of about 18 inches. Then when you reach that depth of 18 inches of good clear ice, then all the people of the community on a designated day would go out and start the ice harvest. And they would cut a hole in the ice in order to get an ice saw down through the ice. And then they would mark off lines on the ice about 18 inches apart. And then they would get a crew to saw along these lines, maybe for 100 or 150 feet. And they would saw maybe a dozen lines like that. And they would saw at right angles or make another cut at right angles, I should say. And so that they would come up with blocks of ice about 18 inches by 18 inches by 18 inches. Then they had a little wooden chute that they would let down into the water. And with ice tongs, they would grab onto these blocks of ice and pull them up on the shore and dump them into sleighs. When they got a load on the sleigh, why the farmer or the Stanleyite would take off for their ice house. And this program would go on usually for a week, maybe 2 weeks at a time. It was hard work, but they would get all of their ice, or their ice houses filled. And after they got them filled, of course, it was all over with. Well, anyway, it was quite a social thing. The women would cook the meals, and they would have large dinners, and the men would eat breakfast out there on the ice. And when it got too dark to cut ice, well, then they would go to somebody's house and have a social evening. And in other words, it was the big event of the winter. The ice harvest was. Those who did not have ice houses they could still store ice by cutting round logs and laying them up like a house window, a little house without windows. And they'd run those walls up about 6, 7, 8 feet. They put down a layer of sawdust in the bottom, maybe 2 feet thick, and then they would fill the center part with ice, and they have about 2 feet of sawdust insulation between the logs and the ice, and then they usually put 3 or 4 feet of sawdust on top of it, and that system of keeping ice worked fairly well, and they had very little money invested in construction. And when they got powered refrigerators, why eventually there were fewer and fewer people left to harvest ice, and eventually that custom completely faded out, and now it's just a memory. Got any questions?
How far were the customers? How many? I read in the Pearl Barber's book about the Galena store.
Well, no, not that far. Because the Galena Summit would be closed by that time. Oh, they would haul ice all the way up the valley. There were quite a few families in the upper valley, like the Lannings and the Dips and the Ockenbaws and the Goes, and the youngs, well, they would all participate in the ice harvest, as well as the Shaws and the Williams. And here in Stanley, they had one bar which was run by Eddie Martin. He would always put up quite a bit of ice for his business. And Mrs. Coffin had the hotel, and she used quite a bit of ice. And Dick Horseman, who built the first lodge up at Redfish Lake, he would take quite a bit of ice to run his restaurant at Redfish Lake. And then down the valley between there was the Shaws, the Williams, and the Flemings, Fred Fleming. Nieces, Juggy's big niece, they had a ranch below, they had the Hanson place, and that next ranch below Hanson's. And that all homesteaded, and they had homestead cabins up there, and for quite a while they lived on those ranches. And then there were, way back in the real early time, there was the Benners. They used quite a bit of ice because first they had a roadhouse to accommodate travelers, and then later they built a two-story hotel which was torn down, and I guess it must have been about the 1960s. And then all the people down at Lower Stanley, of course, they all participated in that ice harvest. So there were a great many tons of ice went out of Little Redfish every December of every year.
And the ice would last mostly.
The ice would usually last at least until the 1st of September in the ice houses. And if they were careful with covering up their ice and keeping the sawdust fairly dry, they could keep ice until, sometimes there was still ice in the ice houses when they started refilling them in December.